Hi, sorry about the false start. We'll call that a soft fork, hard fork issue. So sorry. Um, so Matryx, what we've designed basically is a decentralized research platform. This is how we thought about it. Does anybody know a man by the name of Gregory Perelman? Okay, Gregory Perelman is probably one of this century's most brilliant mathematicians. What was his deal? His deal was he proved something called the Poincare conjecture. Now, the Poincare conjecture is one of 7 millennial problems that a company, or actually an institution called the Clay Mathematical Institution, put up and put $1 million bounty on to actually prove by this century. The first one that's been proved right now is Poincare conjecture by this man, Gregory Perelman. So what's the problem with that? Well, Gregory basically built his work on top of other people's work. A mathematician called Hamilton, a mathematician called Whitehead. So when they called him up and said, hey, it took him 2 years to actually make sure that his proof actually worked. And when they called him up and they said, hey, we're glad you got this thing done. Here's your $1 million check. He said, no, thanks. If I'm going to get the $1 million check, I want to split it with these other mathematicians that my work was based on. And they said, sorry, the rules don't kind of work that way. But here's your $1 million check. We want you to go on the road show and do. He goes, no. I'm not going to be your dog and pony here. If you can't split up the actual money, then you know what? I don't want your prize. So the problem was that the prize was there, but they weren't willing to split it to the people who actually made. And he was, again, he's a genius, but he's standing on the shoulders of other geniuses as well. The problem, how do you actually recognize the people, and how do you get them basically the correct attribution through either compensation or the correct attribution through recognition? So you have this problem, and this problem, of course, affects all of actually science, technology, engineering, manufacturing, or mathematics, because most of these problems are siloed. You have big institutions like Stanford, Harvard, Yale, and they're all working the same thing. So why don't they all get together and make it a little faster? Well, they can't, because there's a process of either you don't have the actual pedigree to work on a problem, or you want to be able to solve the problem first in isolation, so you're not actually asking anybody else if they're solving the problem, or more than likely, because there's so many scientific journals and they're so poorly indexed, you can't figure who's actually working on the problem you're working on. Huge problem. Well, thank goodness now we've got something called the blockchain. That solves the idea of finding things because it's easily sourceable in terms of you can easily index a blockchain and find out if somebody's working on something similar to what you're working on. So we're the Matryx. The company that designed this program is called Nanum. We have 2 pieces of software. You see to your right, and I'll be out later too, demoing these as well. The one to the right is a virtual reality 3D vector calculus program. So imagine, most of the time you try to imagine what a 3D image looks like on a 2D sphere. So you can either see it on a computer or a book, or your calculus teacher takes a half an hour to try to draw it. Well, it's pretty impossible. Well, now we've solved that problem because you can actually step into the actual calculus problem and see it. It gets better. The great thing is because it is a vector, because it's actually a vector calculus, and actually it can be a calculus that can be put into a text file. And because it can be put into a text file, that can be stored on a blockchain. And now somebody can actually go to the blockchain, find that image, and then bring it into the Matryx platform and view the image. And you can view the image with other people as well, so you can build on top of it. The image to the left is our second tool, which is a molecular design tool. One of the hard things about any type of drug design is the actual process itself of discovery. And if you can't actually view it, or view it on a very poor surface, like a 2D surface again, you're back in the same problem. But if you can actually view it in 3D and use your hands, and you can actually introduce different molecules into, let's say, a protein and try to inhibit the protein, well, now you've got a much, much simpler tool. And again, the reason why it's in VR, which makes it makes it easier to collaborate. So you can collaborate with people around the world. So how does it work? Well, we have some very big pharmaceutical clients, for example, and once the actual platform has the molecular design tool, for example, there's a lot of orphan drugs out there that don't affect a big part of the population. Drug companies want to basically do a drug that affects a big part of the population because that's where the payday is. But they don't make any money from a small thing, a small disease that only affects a couple thousand, a couple 100,000 people. So now they're incentivized to go out and say, yeah, we want to actually have a discovery of this drug. So we'll place basically a bounty on the Matryx platform and open it to the world for discovery. Well, now I can be here in San Francisco. I can have a friend that's in La Jolla. I can have a friend that's in France and Germany, and we can work and we can try to figure out some kind of a drug that would work best to inhibit a protein, for example, that we're trying to find a cure for. And it works by attribution. So as you see the Merkle tree here, what we can do is the first person to create a bounty, let's say it's the World Health Organization, they want to create Zika, they want to basically find a cure for Zika. So the Zika virus, they go out and say, we'll go ahead and place 1 million Matryx bounty and see who can cure it. The person who actually comes up with the actual cure, for example, the actual drug, will then basically be attributed with that and get the actual bounty prize. The great thing about the bounty prize itself is now people can work on top of that and remix it. So for example, if that drug works but it has too many side effects, they can actually now remix that drug to make it better. That's what we do. And that's the reason why we discovered the Matryx, or try to put a platform called the Matryx, because the only way to get attribution and make sure people who are recognized, or to make sure people who are compensated, is basically to have our own token. And thankfully, we have Ethereum and other blockchain-like programs nowadays where you can actually go and you can find out, yes, somebody is working on the same thing I'm working on, and actually work in conjunction with them to basically find drugs or discover proteins, etc., to make a world a better place. Now, you're not going to ever skip steps, but you can make things faster, and that's what the Matryx will do. So, thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
We do have some time, so if people have questions, Mark?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you incentivize people to come on board and start making the actual working in collaboration with each other? Yeah, so if you take a look, very, very great question, and here's an answer we found. It's amazing if you take a look at the field of astronomy. The last about 5 years, 80% of the discoveries have been made by citizen scientists like you and I. They haven't been made by major observatories, and why is that? Again, because there is a lack of collaboration. Now, if you give some of the incentive to collaborate, like for instance a PhD student that's not making any money anyways, and they can actually use this platform and work with friends from around the world, for example, they can then. They haven't been made by major observatories, and why is that? Again, because there is a lack of collaboration. Now, if you give some of the incentive to collaborate, like for instance a PhD student that's not making any money anyways, and they can actually use this platform and work with friends from around the world, for example, they can then, with their spare time, be incentivized because they won't get a reward for the bounty that's being created to actually produce a drug or a chemical, or synthesize a chemical or a drug that's already been produced and, like, say, remove the side effects from it, for example. So that would be the incentive process. And I think in the future, you're going to find people who are just incentivized to basically do something and give it to humanity. So there's been a lot of drugs that have been produced that have been basically gifted to humanity, and I think this will also birth that as well.
Any other questions? Yep.
Yes. Yeah, good question. So right now, yeah, IPFS is something we're looking into, and we're also looking into the interplanetary database as well. Because again, right now when we start with a 3D vector calculus, it's pretty easy. It's stored as an equation, which is a text, and the text can be called upon pretty easily and can be stored with very little gas, for example. But as we get more and more complex and we start bringing in molecular design, well, now we're going to have to find places to store a hash actually on the Ethereum blockchain and make it callable to like an IPFS or an IPD. And then that brings to the next question is, now when you start getting more and more complex drugs, you're going to have to do something like protein folding. So whether Golem will be an appropriate solution at the time, we don't know. But we're hopefully going to raise enough money where we can draw on the resources of, let's say, a quantum computer to help us do folding for people on the platform.
Any other questions? Yep.
Sure. Yeah, so the question is, if you have a really good idea and you don't have the resources, you want someone to place a bounty for it, can that be done? Yeah, exactly. So if you know a benefactor, or even if you want to, you can go ahead and say, I'll place a bounty on my own project that I want developed, and have other people help you develop that project. So yeah, in theory, you either can respond to someone else's bounty for their desire to have you create something, or you can create your own bounty and have other people help you.
Well, thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you.
If Dennis Renes is in the audience, please make your way to the side.